Holy shit, a 3-hour video on Tears of the Kingdom.
What may be more difficult than creating a masterpiece, especially one that changes the direction of a series or franchise, is being able to continue on. When something becomes so beloved by fans and draws in so many new ones, the expectations for the future become daunting. You have to prove you know which changes garnered its success. What direction do you want to take it next? Which aspects should be brought back from the older entries? How do we create something that stands alone without abandoning the qualities that made it successful? Tears of the Kingdom took up this challenge to become a sequel which not only expands on this brand new formula, but proves that this is the correct direction for the series. The expectations of this sequel come from so many directions. Some fans wanted a return to the more classical style of gameplay, others wanted more of the same or perhaps just some tweaks to this new gameplay loop. Ever since the game's release, I've seen
Oh,
opinions from
nice.
so many different angles on dungeons, exploration, story, and so much more that completely
That makes me
disagree
want
with
to
each other. For
play
some of us, the game met
my
our
wacky-ass
expectations and
version of
in some
Mugen.
places even exceeded it. Yet,
Oh, hey, there's
somehow,
somebody.
these
Let's
things that
fucking
even
go.
go beyond what we hoped create this feeling of something missing. I don't think I've ever played a video game that confused my feelings about it quite as much as Tears of the Kingdom. Especially with everything I said in my previous video, this game went beyond my personal expectation and did exactly what I wanted it to do. So why was there any hesitation on how I felt? After sitting with this game for
Another
so
really
long,
good
I
hand.
couldn't help but have one strong feeling I could not budge.
Hmm.
Many of the things that Tears of the Kingdom copies from Breath of the Wild, it does incredibly well, and in many aspects significantly improves. But it is where this game decides to do something different and unique to this sequel is where it stands out. However, it is in these parts that the game can
Opening with
feel
a
like it
with
really
a
holds
hand
back,
that's too
as if
good
it was
is
reined in by the
honestly
fear
pretty
of new
detrimental
expectations.
sometimes.
By really understanding where Tears of the Kingdom tries to become more of its own thing, I started to see this game as something beyond incredible, but also something I wish I got so much more of. Breath of the Wild challenged the conventions of Zelda that had been established over the years, bringing the series back to its more non-linear roots. Not only could dungeons be done in any order, but whether or not you even complete them all is entirely up to the player. Combat can be approached in multiple
What are they
ways, any mountain can be
doing?
climbed up, any quest can be completed at almost any time. The adventure is entirely yours. For many players, one of the greatest strengths of the game was the feeling of discovery, yet that feeling of discovering something new for the first time couldn't be replicated on repeat playthroughs. Enjoyment when returning to the game was going to be more dependent on the gameplay. Many of the issues in the replayability of Breath of the Wild came down to its balancing. The rupees, items, and upgrades that you needed to get through the game were minimal at best, and even when you did need them, they would easily be obtained while doing the main quests. Engaging in combat could be unrewarding and never really felt like a requirement
Engaging
outside
it?
of bosses. In combat could be unrewarding, be obtained while doing the main quests. Engaging in combat could be
Engaging.
unrewarding and never really felt like a requirement outside of bosses, and the rupees you could earn from selling made side quests completely irrelevant. Earning good equipment was more dependent on finding random weapons in shrines, rather than something the player could always do when they needed weapons. This made weapons far more precious than the durability system was built for, and yet Breath of the Wild is nothing short of a masterpiece. So outside of these small balance changes, how could the series possibly move forward and get better? While the world of Hyrule was vast, there was certainly potential to add in much more content. This began
Oh
by
my god, we're
adding the
actually gonna
DLC
play.
packs to Breath of the
Who is
Wild,
that? Oh,
pulling
it's
in some
Rika.
new ideas and content that could not be put in the original game. Yet the development team found themselves with too many ideas to be able to put in through just DLC packs. Rather than pick and choose what content to put in another DLC pack, the team ultimately decided to take all of their ideas and from it create a sequel. A lot of the ideas they had for the DLC, which made it into the sequel, were plans originally made for the base game of Breath of the Wild, which could not be fully realised. Even the additions of the caves and Sky Islands were ideas that came from the original development of Breath of the Wild, but issues with timing and the processing power of the Wii U prevented their implementations. Parts of Tears of the Kingdom's story that include a destroyed Master Sword and an injured Link with a replacement arm are things that come from the concept art of Breath of the Wild. So from this, the development team began Tears of the Kingdom, pulling together all these unused ideas and things they couldn't accomplish before, with new ideas that they gained along the way. Once the game was in a completed state, it wasn't released for another year, giving the team as much time as possible to make sure all of the various engines in the game worked as intended, a level of polish that is rare in the current age of video games. After almost 4 years of waiting since its announcement, and almost 6.5 years after first being able to explore this Hyrule, we were finally able to head beneath Hyrule Castle. Players will return to Hyrule likely feeling that they know the world they're going into and are prepared for the challenges ahead. The game's prologue challenges this. We open beneath Hyrule Castle, an area we previously didn't know existed, following Link and Zelda as they explore the dark tunnels beneath. An ominous track plays in the background, with mysterious voices chanting, the music getting heavier and faster as the player descends deeper into the land below. Within these passages lie relics of an ancient time, including murals that describe a period of history that is mostly unknown. The more you discover, the more you realize that you do not know everything about this world that you've been exploring for so many years. More murals are obscured by rubble that you cannot read, a mystery that you will carry with you throughout the game, hoping to discover. Once you descend to the deepest part of these tunnels, as the gloom grows thicker, you come across a large platform, with a lifeless, mummified body leaking with this gloom and a swirl of green energy rising from it. The tension builds up to the moment you approach this body, and the hand holding it down falls off, leaving behind a stone. The corpse starts to awaken with stiffened and grotesque movement until its eyes pierce the darkness, with gloom bursting out of the body's chest, attacking our protagonists. This unknown enemy not only drains Link of most of his strength, but completely shatters the Master Sword. The power that had helped Link save the kingdom once before is no longer enough. But as the shard of the sword flies forward, it scrapes across the demon's face, making him bleed. A small glimmer of hope. Link and Zelda are taunted by this demon, who speaks to them with a voice that, while sounding withered, is incredibly chilling and intimidating. He falls back into the darkness as the platform crumbles away, leaving behind ruin. Zelda falls with the platform, with Link throwing the Master Sword away to jump after her, but fails only to watch her disappear with the blinding light. This all happens within what feels like just a moment, but almost every part of it gives the player so many questions. What was the stone Zelda picked up? Who is Rauru? How does the mummy know who Link and Zelda are? The prologue welcomes you back to this version of Hyrule, and through its masterful work in creating an atmosphere of tension and mystery, the world the
A
player
good
thought they
thing
knew
both
so
of
much about
our
becomes almost completely unknown once again.
Stardusts are completely
Your first
useless.
meeting with the Demon King makes you feel weak, with a long journey ahead to gain strength. When returning to Hyrule in Tears of the Kingdom, I found myself engaging in the world from the very beginning, whether it was exploring every cave, clearing each enemy camp, earning rewards from side quests, or even collecting every item in a forest. The game posed a greater purpose for each thing that you do in its world. So is this enough for it to succeed? Breath of the Wild took the series back to its original roots in 1986 to create the most open and engaging version of Hyrule, a masterpiece in exploration and discovery. Tears of the Kingdom had the immense challenge of being the first game to take this further, attempting to evolve an already incredible game to give it more depth. Whether this is through simple balance changes, various types of gameplay found in different areas, or new abilities and systems to interact with the world around you. As we go through the sequel, we will be asking what's stayed the same, what's been improved, where does it get things wrong, and what can we hope for in the future. I hope you enjoy your time as we break down this sequel that dared to take on the expectations of being the next step in evolving this legendary series. The Zelda series has often had a theme of the hero coming back from failure as something stronger. It acts as a display of Link's courage that even in the face of immense power, he manages to pull through and use that to his advantage. This is a theme that started in A Link to the Past, where he was pulled into the Dark World after losing a fight to Aghanim. After this loss, he uses travel between the worlds of light and darkness to his advantage. We see this theme in almost every single Zelda game from here on, yet it wasn't quite the same in Breath of the Wild. The game implies that at no point is Link truly stronger than he was 100 years ago. Once we return to Tears of the Kingdom, we see this theme return in full force. After losing his arm and the Master Sword to Ganondorf's attack, he comes back as a greater force, against the odds, with a powerful arm granting him new abilities, determined to find Princess Zelda and save Hyrule. Link awakens
Dude,
with
this is
his
gonna
new
be a
arm on the
miserable
Great
match.
Sky Island, the main tutorial area of the game, reminiscent of the Great Plateau in the prequel. While many parts of it are incredibly similar, such as introducing you to new abilities through 4 different shrines, guided by the spirit of a King of Hyrule, it has one significant difference: linearity. It's through this linearity that the game attempts to slowly introduce the player to the more complicated aspects added to this game for returning players, while also being able to introduce everything to new players. This is achieved through the shape of the island, as well as the blocks in progress that require certain abilities to be unlocked and used, almost like a traditional dungeon. The new abilities that Link has in this game are more than what the Sheikah Slate runes were in Breath of the Wild. Some of the abilities that you get from the Sheikah Slate runes still exist in this game through the item system, but we'll go into that in more detail later on. But the abilities that you gain here are a lot more fundamental to the game itself. While you can perhaps argue that, due to the linearity, the Great Skyland is not as fun as the Great Plateau, it does a great job at showing the player how useful and important the abilities can be in the open world in order to progress, unlike the Sheikah Slate runes that simply allowed you to earn a few extra chests in the plateau. Once you have all of these new abilities, the island no longer feels linear. It becomes incredibly easy to navigate, making these abilities feel a lot more useful. I don't believe the Great Sky Island needed to be as open as the plateau was, purely because most people know what Breath of the Wild was like. The plateau was great at teaching the player how to explore, but the Great Sky Island teaches the player how to traverse, and it does a good job at it. The new abilities in this game, with the exception of one, are not like traditional Zelda items at all, but entirely new gameplay systems, changing how you interact with the world around you. The first ability you will unlock is Ultra Hand. It's easy to understand the initial concept of it if you're familiar with the powers in Breath of the Wild and how their usage has been evolved by the fanbase over time. Fans were able to use Magnesis to break the game in strange ways, including creating flying vehicles. Though it can be tricky to get it to work, it's accessible to any player. Ultra Hand comes from embracing this and posing 2 simple questions. Do we have to limit this to metal objects, and can we make this ability something that expands the player's creativity? And from this, we have Ultra Hand. The ability works by allowing you to manipulate and move any free object, and the player can also glue these items together in any orientation. On the Great Sky Island, the developers make a point of showing you how important this ability is by forcing the player to use it to be able to move forward once it's obtained. Whether this is building bridges, boats, or even rail cars, the things you need to craft with this ability will gradually get more complex until the player is likely very well versed in this ability, and will therefore be more likely to use it whenever they can.
Wow, nice.
This ability has endless uses. At the start of my first playthrough, this was mainly used to build overly large bridges to cross any gaps and scale heights, but later on, you'll be able to attach items to it that allow you to build traps, vehicles, weapons. What you can build is almost entirely up to what the player can think of, with very little limitation. Depending on your skill with this ability, you can use it to play through the game in an entirely different way, though if you wish, this ability can be used minimally outside of it being required in puzzles. The freedom you have with this ability can almost be overwhelming at the start, but in time it becomes second nature to use. I expect to continue to be surprised at what people will be able to come up with and create. But outside of creating things, this ability is often used in puzzles, and we'll go into that in more detail later. Now, it may seem that this ability has been made too powerful due to it not being limited to metal like Magnesis was, but I will argue that this is not actually the case. Just because you can move things around, it doesn't necessarily mean it will provide you with any use at all, and this is also a credit to how carefully the game has been designed. Furthermore, freedom can make puzzle solving more difficult. When you saw metal in Breath of the Wild, it was a lot easier to recognize that maybe you should be using Magnesis here. With the
You're out
freedom
of
to move
servants.
any object, you have to think more about where it would actually be useful to grab and move something around. Puzzles are not the same as they were in Breath of the Wild, so while Ultra Hand may have made some puzzles easier if it was in Breath of the Wild, the challenge is made appropriate to the toolkit here, and even opens up a lot more possibilities. Going back to the initial reveal for the sequel to Breath of the Wild, the trailer we were shown took place entirely underground. Many people therefore assumed that a way they would expand the world of Hyrule would be the underground. It wasn't until 2021 that we actually saw the game, but to our surprise, we were shown the world above Hyrule more than we were below. What was interesting to me was seeing Ascend. Perhaps it was because we were shown this ability first in the sky, so we assumed it was a sky ability, but once we saw how Ascend worked in the gameplay reveal, its original purpose became apparent. This is a way to exit underground sections and caves, preventing these areas from ruining the interconnectivity that Breath of the Wild had established. If you were on top of a mountain, you could leave with ease by jumping down and gliding. So how would you solve this in a cave? And in true fashion of this modern Zelda team, the simplest answer is given without fear of it giving the player too much freedom. The Ascend ability for Tears of the Kingdom is as essential to the freedom of mobility as paragliding and climbing was in Breath of the Wild. I can almost guarantee that this is the origin of this ability with what we know about this team's development. It's likely that they wanted to expand the world of Hyrule both with the caves and beneath the surface, with a method to exit out of them without being forced to use fast travel. This ability works really well for this purpose, especially in caves, as you can explore even the deepest caves without having any fear of not being able to exit them. This also allows the player to easily reach the top of mountains by entering them inside and ascending through. When approaching platform-based puzzles, Ascend also takes a spin on similar items from past entries, such as the claw shot. The primary difference here is that instead of a clear marker showing that you can grapple here, you have to see a ledge and remind yourself that you can ascend through it. In my previous video, a large part of the discussion was about 3 flaws of the game. Firstly, I talked about the durability system. I stated that it wasn't the durability system that was inherently the problem, but instead a lack of the ability to replace items if they broke. When fighting a camp of enemies, defeating these enemies doesn't provide you with any method to replace the weapons, so it's better to avoid fighting them altogether. Another issue was the lack of interconnectivity between the areas of the map. All sections of the map were entirely independent of each other, where no resources in one area would give you significant help in another. And finally, the third issue I discussed was how many of the resources' greatest value was, well, their value in rupees, especially the case with gemstones that had no use outside of selling them and earning a ton of rupees, and this made side quests completely pointless. I suggested that one change could fix all 3 of these things at once: a proper crafting system. And so, with Tears of the Kingdom, not only was I delighted to see that this was implemented, but it was done in a way that was way better than I imagined. The Zelda team had created a fluid, intuitive, and instantaneous weapon crafting system with Fuse. As we were seeing more and more of the game, this was the most exciting reveal to me, as it had the potential to solve some of the biggest issues that I had with the predecessor. It was only until I played the game myself could I say that it worked just as well as I had hoped. Fuse allows you to attach any item, whether it's a free object in the overworld or an item from your inventory, to either your weapon or shield, and additionally allows you to add any item in your inventory onto an arrow. This not only adds attack power to your weapon, but it can also increase its durability. This often works by having a base weapon, such as a sword, with an item such as a monster's horn. One of the coolest things I could do in combat would be to go up against a tough group of enemies, but try and focus on the most powerful one. If I was successful in defeating them, I could use that enemy's horn and craft a new weapon during combat that would tip the scale in my favour. Durability is also dependent on the item you have fused to your weapon, with most weapons allowing an additional 25 hits to your weapon, which can sometimes more than double a weapon's durability. Because of this system, almost all the different classes of base weapons can be somewhat viable at any point in the game. They do have differences in their damage, but this is minimal comparatively once you've used Fuse to improve it. Therefore, to make each weapon stand out, base weapons now have individual properties, such as an improved flurry rush or improved charge attacks, and sometimes even scaling properties when fused with appropriate materials. But one thing we should discuss is how fuse can affect the scaling between the different weapon types. In Breath of the Wild, the difference in damage between one-handed and two-handed weapons averaged to a 44% increase in damage. When we consider fuse, it initially seems that the increase in damage points between one and two-handed weapons of the same class is only a 15% increase in damage on average, making two-handed weapons seem like they have a much lower DPS. However, there is a secret scaler in the game for both two-handed weapons and spears. Two-handed weapons will do an additional 5% damage than what the numbers show, and spears will do 25% less damage than what they show, though this is still far from the damage difference you would have in Breath of the Wild. After doing many calculations and in-game tests, it appears that two-handed weapons are now less powerful than they were in Breath of the Wild once you introduce fuse, but due to scalars, it is certainly less significant a difference than it might seem on the surface, so I am glad that they bothered to put these scalars in as a way to try and balance everything. If you were ever wondering why enemy health is hidden in this game and no armor shows you their health values this time around, it's likely because of the various scalars that now exist within the game to balance the combat out. Therefore, there might be other scalars that I'm not aware of. In the prequel, I usually kept a good number of claymores in my inventory, but I just found myself completely avoiding picking them up in this game. And I bring this up because this is the only downside that fuse has. Much like how the rest of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom works in terms of the physics engine, applying your logic and ingenuity to solve puzzles, fuse almost always works exactly as you expect it to. Whether it's adding a heavy and flat horn to act as a hammer and smash through rock, something with elemental properties to provide elemental attacks, or attaching various objects on your shield for mobility, such as a railcar or rocket, a spring, or even frozen meat. But using fuse on your sword and shield is only really the beginning. You can use fuse to attach items from your inventory onto your arrows. Monster horns that you have in your inventory, which may be too weak to make weapons with, can now be placed on an arrow just to add some additional damage. Depending on what elemental item you put on your arrow will also determine the impact the element has. While a fire fruit will add a small flame to your arrow, a ruby causes a devastating explosion. There are also some items that only provide benefits for bows, such as wings which let you shoot arrows further, or eyeballs which you can use as a homing arrow. A lot of these items are usable in both combat and puzzles. In this way, they act almost like traditional Zelda items. Whether it's bomb flowers acting similarly to how they did in traditional games, or elemental fruits that provide you with elemental arrows, these resources can be found from the very start and open up your exploration of the world. And stepping outside of fuse for a moment, there have been massive improvements in the amounts of buffs you can earn from items you collect. Thanks to the addition of things such as sticky lizards and sticky frogs, the player now has a way to navigate the terrain when it's raining, something which was much needed. An additional change is the new buffs which power you up in certain conditions. For example, a buff which increases your damage in hot areas. This gives you a greater importance to having the correct armor sets for different areas. Let's say you were wearing a heat-proof armor so you can survive a hot area, you can then also apply a buff which boosts your attack damage in the heat. Such a combination can be useful when you're fighting against Gleeoks, which affect the environment around them. But maybe the best part is how materials can now just act like old-school Zelda items. While you can attach them to your arrows for further reach, any material can be thrown, allowing you to still use its ability. This lets so many items have a sense of individuality and purpose. Another aspect to items we should discuss are Zonai devices. These devices are often powered by Link's energy cell, which is described by the developers as this game's version of the magic meter. This meter exclusively powers Zonai tech, whether it's for combat, puzzles, or transport. The majority of these devices are purposefully designed after more modern technologies found in the real world, such as fans and wheels. And this was done so that players could understand how they should work immediately, removing any additional layer of things the player needs to figure out, and likely helping it improve the creativity. Basically, if it looks like something from real life, it will probably behave in a way that the player expects. This was an important thing to do, especially considering one of the things that made Breath of the Wild so incredible was that the physics and chemistry engines were implemented in such a way that anything you tried to do acted in a way you would expect, so puzzle solving could be more intuitive. When adding technology to the game, you have to be careful that this doesn't therefore ruin this new core principle of the series. These devices really allow puzzle solving to expand when paired with Ultra Hand and Fuse, with the main use being attaching these devices together and to other objects, creating anything you need to progress, from platforms to pulley systems and even advanced machines. Simply knowing what item might be useful on its own is not enough. You will have to come up with your own solution using a combination of different objects and devices in order to create a solution. There is this genius to these devices. They can act like traditional Zelda items that you never have to learn how to use. Many items in Zelda that can even be the main item in a dungeon are incredibly simple, from a wand that makes fire or ice to something that allows you to jump higher, or a shield that reflects light. Because the only controls you'll need to know are using Ultra Hand and Fuse and then your other weapons, you can be given any item and use it easily in a way you would expect. In traditional Zelda, you would be given a mirror shield to manipulate light and solve puzzles. In Tears of the Kingdom, you can find a mirror and decide to either move it around freely or even attach it to your shield and create a mirror shield. And even though we're talking about Zonai devices here, as I mentioned before, this extends to a ton of items that you can just pick up and throw or shoot, such as ice berries and bomb flowers. This is where I believe this game landed on something incredible. Ultra Hand and Fuse being a gameplay system that allows you to use Zonai devices, items, and objects to craft your own Zelda items for what you need. This is a system that would be almost perfect, but it does have a very significant flaw. The main way to earn Zonai devices is to trade Zonai charges at these dispensers, found mainly around the Sky Islands. Each dispenser has its own set of devices it can reward you with when you trade in Zonai charges, which are dropped mainly from construct enemies. Which devices the dispensers will give you is randomized from their limited selection. Now, we will talk more about the impacts that these devices have at different parts of the game as and when it is appropriate, but there is something that I do want to mention now. The ability to dispense a limitless amount of Zonai devices from dispensers and store them in your inventory can almost ruin the game entirely, and due to the game's design, it can feel unnecessary. Zonai devices allow you to bypass almost every single part of the gameplay that the player should be engaging in. Whenever it is appropriate and useful to have these devices, they're given to you. This extends to shrines, main dungeons, sky islands, parts of the depths, and even the surface. The parts of the map that have Korok puzzles and chests that you can earn often enough give you a selection of devices to see if you can complete it with them. And it's a lot more fun this way. The Sky Islands also have sections where you can find devices lying around and create things that let you fly from island to island. At the start of the game, you'll probably only be able to use the devices you find lying around, and if you don't use them well, you fail the puzzle. This is good, this is a limitation that works. But if you have 10 steering wheels, 20 rockets, and 40 fans in your inventory, there is no longer a puzzle. This makes the early game a much more engaging experience, but as the player goes further through, all limitations are absent, and a lot of that engagement is lost. We'll talk about a few more examples of this as we go on later, as there are parts that this affects a lot more than others. I don't believe there should have been no way to use these devices outside of when they're given, but there's already an ability that would solve this. Auto-build. Auto-build is an ability that lets you rebuild things you've created before, from your recent history of creations, ones you've saved, or designs you can unlock.
Help me, dude.
Any parts you are missing can be created, but you have to use Zonite in order to do this. This is a material that you can find as you explore the depths. If we imagine that earning and storing Zonai devices was far more limited, by not having so many devices in your inventory
it's only
and
as long as
being more
they're on the
dependent
field.
on using auto-build,
Interesting.
it would begin to mitigate the problem by requiring Zonite. This is because Zonite is a much more difficult thing to earn than Zonite charges, and it's also earned from a different map, being the depths. It gives the idea of a choice of where the player can access difficulty. You can either be limited to build with what you find lying around, or explore the more difficult depths in order to earn Zonite, so you can use auto-build whenever you need it. At least this way, the deaths would actually be a more fundamental part of this gameplay loop. I do think this would have worked well, especially if it was paired with an area that has all the Zonai devices you've used before in an unlimited supply, so you could create new things for auto-build. But you would have to use a lot of Zonite to create them, and can't just use the large amount of items in your inventory. You shouldn't be able to store a ton of rockets in your inventory with no limit, and pull them out whenever you want to quickly skip a puzzle. You can use them when you find them, or attach them to a shield, taking up an inventory slot. And in my opinion, that should have been it. For example, having a rocket or spring attached to a shield in order to reach a certain height more easily. Using up a shield slot to be able to keep these devices in your inventory is great, and it could be immensely satisfying, but instead you can have 50 rockets in your inventory and use them whenever. This stops something that could feel like a smart decision in inventory management to something that feels like cheating. It would be like if Breath of the Wild gave you the Master Cycle 0 from the beginning and you could just dispense fuel for it whenever, using bokoblin horns or something else. Or imagine if you could summon pools of water or metal ramps and be able to use Cryonis and Magnesis with them whenever you wanted. I'm not saying Zonai dispensers should have absolutely been removed, but I don't think it's controversial to say that it should have been balanced a lot better. Much like how I stopped myself from selling items in Breath of the Wild to have more fun on repeat playthroughs, when replaying Tears of the Kingdom, stopping myself from using the Zonai dispensers makes the game exponentially more fun. These items and abilities are not too much for this game. I wouldn't argue that they're too powerful, but there's just a little bit of a balance issue that can really tip the scale. But there is one more ability that I really want to talk about. Puzzles and combat that makes the player interact with the world around them is an aspect of Zelda that has always been strong. Breath of the Wild was created to push that boundary, to make almost every object interactive so that everything around you could be used and could be considered for the solution to either a puzzle or to defeating an enemy. Such a boundary is pushed further with Recall. This ability is given to you as Zelda's Sage's Vow. When activating this ability, time around you freezes, allowing you to select any object and reverse
Wow, this is
its
the
motion
first
through
time I've ever seen
This
a girl
adds another
principle be
layer to
used.
puzzles, as not only are you considering using objects through the physics engine, but now you also add the layer of their position and time. Limitations on this
It
ability
literally
are
acts
also
as a
minimal.
fucking
There is no
morphing jar
cooldown to
panic
using it,
button.
and there is
Oh
almost
shit,
no
thing.
limit on the object you can use
Or
this
not
on.
even
On a
morphing jar,
technical
it's
level, this ability is
that
very
one
impressive.
card that's banned,
Every
it's
inanimate
also a jar,
object
I
has its
forgot the name,
position and
fiber
motion
jar.
stored in memory, so that Recall can reverse this motion accurately. One thing that really impressed me was
Also,
using
what a
Recall
fucking
after I'd used the
top-decking
Zonai
god to
dispenser,
just get Adam
being
and
able to
Eve
see
immediately
how
like
any
that.
one of these capsules could have their motion reversed. And what I found to be the best thing about this ability is how its usefulness throughout the game is entirely up to the player more than any of the other abilities or even any Zelda item has been. For example, players can use Recall as a safety net, allowing them to return objects to their original position if, let's say, they dropped something off the edge of a sky island. The ability can also be paired with Ultra Hand, allowing the player to lift a flying device into the air for an easy takeoff. While some players have found more complicated ways to use Recall in combat, you can do very easy things like returning some projectiles that enemies will throw at you. Just another way that the game is able to expand the combat loop. Though I'll go into shrines in greater depth later on, some shrines show the best example of how having Recall always in the back of your head can prove to be a great advantage. Throughout this video, I'll be mentioning parts of the game that I found it could be used, often in really cool ways. If you didn't find Recall to be all that useful in another playthrough of the game, give Recall a try in every shrine you enter. You may surprise yourself in how useful it may be. Recall stands out to me in how different it is to the other three abilities. Ultra Hand, Ascend, and Fuse are core changes to the gameplay and how you interact with the world around you, but Recall is something different. Outside of some shrines, it's something that you are rarely encouraged to use, but it is a freedom given to the player to use at will. The game intentionally teaches you a lot less about the ways you can use Recall compared to the other abilities, allowing its usefulness to be discovered by the player over time. And to me, it made finding ways that I could make things easier using Recall one of the most satisfying parts of the game, and at a push, I might even say the whole series. Aside from puzzle solving, these abilities can add a whole new layer to combat. using Ultra Hand to create large and crazy weapons or traps, and Fuse to forge weapons that can apply many different status effects to enemies. But first, I do want to talk about the basic hand-to-hand combat, as I had some issues of note in my previous video that I was hoping would improve.
Yeah, I was getting a little tired of that game
Parrying
too.
is definitely something I was interested in seeing in this game, as I had a slight problem with it in Breath of the Wild due to its very
I couldn't even play
limited use.
Urshigal. Gosh darn
If,
it.
when fighting an enemy, you decided to parry an attack rather than flurry rush, you would get fewer hits on the enemy, doing less damage overall. Furthermore, if you mistime a dodge, you will likely still avoid the attack. If you incorrectly time a parry, you get hit. The only benefit against any normal attack with a parry is that you do not need directional accuracy, as a vertical or horizontal attack can be parried either way, unlike the flurry rush. But most enemies would wind up so slowly that it's easy to tell the direction that they were going to hit you anyway. Finally, you could use parrying to disarm an enemy, but your shield had to be way more powerful than the enemy you were fighting, so this was almost pointless. So is parry much better this time around? Well, yes and no. Firstly, there is a new move that many of the common enemy types have, such as bokoblins, being a head ram. This move is definitely much better to parry than to dodge, as enemies can chase you down after you dodge to the side. This was a great addition, and while there are a couple more examples of moves like this, I do wish there were quite a few more. Due to Fuse, the parry can be a more useful ability if you're willing to explore with it.
Oh boy.
Some items can increase the ability to disarm, which can be useful. Furthermore, parrying with a fused item that has an elemental or status effect on it will apply this to the enemy you're hitting.
Motherfucker.
This means that using a parry outside of actually parrying an attack can act as an elemental attack. You can then follow up with a different melee attack. Shattering a frozen enemy does 3 times the damage in most cases, so having an ice shield with a fire weapon is a great way to take down a group of tough enemies. So while I'll argue Fuse doesn't necessarily make parrying itself better, it definitely improves your options instead of just using Flurry Rush. But overall, the Flurry Rush was and still is a much better option, and makes the parry feel like a bad choice, which I feel is odd considering it's harder to pull off and requires you to have a shield. The main responses I received defending Breath of the Wild's parry was saying, oh, it only exists for parrying Octoroks and Guardian Beams. But that doesn't mean it can't be useful in general combat. In Tears of the Kingdom, even that no longer stands. Guardian Beams are no longer present, and Octorok attacks are better countered using recall. So in this way, the parry is almost less useful than it was before. I know that I'm nitpicky about this, like super nitpicky, but I just wish that a high-skill combat option gave an appropriate reward. But considering how complex the combat system is now, letting you use so many different items to create different weapons and tools, I don't think it's much of a problem anymore. Another cool improvement comes in the form of enemy combos. I mentioned in my previous video that enemies have an issue when it comes to their increasing difficulty. Higher tier enemies may have more health and do more damage, but by doing the exact same moves you've been used to the whole game, combat would often become stale and not actually feel any harder. My wish was that as enemies increase in difficulty tier, from red to blue to black, etc., that they would have extended combos with different moves that you have to learn. And in Tears of the Kingdom, we have exactly that. There are a few points where I was taken off guard, not expecting a combo to extend and causing me to get hit because I thought I had an opening. These moments were genuinely exciting, as even with fighting bokoblins, there were things I had to relearn as I got further into the game. Higher level enemies may also avoid your line of sight when aiming at them with a bow, making it more difficult to hit them from afar and forcing you to face them head on. However, for the sake of covering all grounds, I will say that the issue still partially stands. As these new moves are additional extensions to combos, rather than completely fresh combos or just new moves, if you know the first few moves of an enemy's combo, you'll still be able to flurry rush them probably before you even see any of their new moves. And this can make fights with higher difficulty enemies stop feeling any different. Experienced players from Breath of the Wild will likely crumple enemies quickly before they even know that these enemies have new moves. I know it took me a while before I even noticed harder enemies could extend their combos. While I may seem incredibly critical, this is just to be consistent with what I said in the previous video. Though parts of the basic combat system aren't too much improved, the overall combat in this game is far more expansive and honestly a lot more fun. Using puff shrooms to give me an escape and using a stealth attack, or mother buds to make enemies attack each other, elemental shields that provide a ton of different effects, and drones that can fight alongside me. The new item system really opened combat up, and while the basic one-to-one combat isn't different, the expansive ways you can tackle fights made them so much more engaging. And I know I've mentioned this already, but I can't say enough about how awesome it is to use Fuse mid-combat. Something about earning new resources and crafting new weapons while fighting a group of large enemies is just incredible. As much as I love Breath of the Wild, I got bored of the combat in that game incredibly quickly. With the few enemy types you fight, I learned how to flurry rush every move, and that was the extent of what I ended up doing with almost every enemy. The Tears of the Kingdom's combat kept me engaged for a lot longer, freezing time and reversing projectiles back at enemies, adding things to my shield to bounce enemies back or cause explosions if they attack me, crafting stronger weapons while dodging attacks. It felt like such a huge improvement. Larger groups of enemies made things feel more fun than tedious, and even now, I'm still having a great time with the combat. Link's new arm is more than a set of abilities. They are aspects of the gameplay that change how you will interact with this world of Hyrule, as fundamental as climbing and paragliding were in the prequel. Your imagination, intuition, and resourcefulness are the main tool here, making something even more unconfined than one of the most open and freeing games in history. There is a lot of merit in that. I'm still so impressed that a single ability in Fuse was able to solve most of the issues I had in Breath of the Wild exactly in the way that I'd hoped. But with such great improvements, unfortunately come a few new problems. I will hold my argument that these abilities, specifically Ultra Hand, are not too overpowered. The issues I do have almost always come from certain Zonai devices, which have little to no restriction on the number you can earn, how many can be stored, and where they can be used. Breath of the Wild was happy to implement limits, restricting climbing in shrines and dungeons to allow for more engaging puzzle solving. While I appreciate that the developers wanted this game to exist without restrictions, I think it's fair to say that this didn't come without some loss of challenge and engagement for many players. But outside of the new powers given to the player, there is a lot more that has changed this time around. The Kingdom of Hyrule, ravaged by the upheaval, is not the same place it was before. While most of the surface remains the same, the sky is full of islands, new monsters roam the land, caves have opened up all around, large chasms tear open the ground. Fujibayashi, the director of this game, has been working on the Zelda series since 2001, directing the Oracle games and Four Swords, but he started directing the mainline games from Skyward Sword. This system was very limited due to the hardware limitations in 2011, so was likely not the fully realised vision. But 12 years later, it has been made possible. Returning to the surface world is not only completely seamless, but feels liberating. At the end of every session exploring the Sky Islands, diving off the edge and viewing the whole world from above never really gets old. Hyrule is now a much larger map, over 2 times the size, with multiple layers to explore, all connected seamlessly. But before we get into the new worlds above and below, how has the surface changed after the upheaval? There is a new feeling of uncanny. There's something great about seeing this world change after being with it for so many years. The
including arts
upheaval's
and
effect on different
abilities.
areas is much more
I
impactful,
should have
knowing
just
what they
grabbed
looked like
something that
before,
wasn't a fucking
adding a
servant.
greater feeling of urgency. The first place you're encouraged to head is Lookout Landing, but not by a marker telling you to go there. For returning players, you'll likely notice this new place didn't exist before. Once you've arrived at this new area, you'll find that it contains most of what you need for your adventure, acting as a nice home base. Whether it's to buy equipment, get extra arrows, cook, use the cursed statue, or upgrade your energy cell. Once you speak to Pura, you'll also be able to kick off the main quests. You can earn your paraglider, learn how to activate the new towers, and you'll be asked to investigate the phenomena in each region caused by the upheaval. There are additional side adventures that you can also begin here, starting with learning about the chasms that have appeared around Hyrule. From here, you can now begin your adventure across this unfamiliar Hyrule. There are many returning and new ways in which you'll end up engaging in combat, the most common often being enemy camps. While enemy camps don't have too much difference outside of some of their new, larger designs and additional enemies, their place within the game has a much greater importance. Completing a camp will still reward you with whatever you find in the chest. The biggest point of contention here will likely be that rewards in these chests may be less significant than what was found in Breath of the Wild. But what we should consider is that in Breath of the Wild, the overall reward for completing the camp was not worth the resources it took. Losing a few weapons to access the chest with a piece of amber or some arrows didn't add up to being worthwhile, as weapons of high quality are not always easy to resupply, so avoiding the camp altogether was the better option. In Tears of the Kingdom, by completing a camp, you don't only receive the reward in the chest, but a large supply of monster parts that can be used for crafting. Even the weaker enemy horns can be used for high power arrows, so every enemy defeated will be of use. A camp with no chest reward in Tears of the Kingdom can feel more rewarding overall than a camp with a chest in Breath of the Wild. Due to the increased durability from fusing, you'll often be able to use a single weapon to clear a camp, meaning the cost of clearing a camp can now just be one weapon. A brave player may also attempt to take on more powerful groups of enemies. If they are successful in defeating even one of them, the enemy's horn can be used to create a more powerful weapon, allowing them to have a fighting chance in this group. Arrows are also plentiful here. Crates lying around camps will often have a large number of arrows inside, meaning the player will likely leave a combat encounter with more arrows than they started with. Many camps challenge you with the same enemies we are used to, but the upheaval introduces many new enemy types to the world. The enemy variety comes with more depth this time around, with new enemy types having specific roles they fulfill. Though they don't make the roster of enemies huge, they provide a greater amount of variation to combat and rewards. Some of the returning
Are they
enemies will be
actually
found
using
wearing armor.
Michaela?
Armor can only be destroyed by force, such as using blunt weapons or bombs. Having these enemies mixed in forces the player to use different weapons rather than just relying on one type. This integration type works a lot better than the standard elemental enemies. Despite being able to make elemental weapons at any time with materials that are easier to source, returning fire and ice enemies, such as Lizalfos, can still be killed in one hit. When you consider being able to use fuse on your arrows, it makes these enemies significantly easier to defeat than before. This change not being here is strange considering the new elemental enemies and bosses are simply easier to defeat using elemental attacks rather than being completely cheesed by them, but perhaps this is simply the developers wanting consistency with Breath of the Wild. Overall, Tears of the Kingdom handles weaknesses and the usefulness of having a variety of equipment and items much better than its predecessor. Outside of new variants, let's discuss the new enemy types added. Much of the combat difficulty in Breath of the Wild depended on large groups of enemies. With the addition of the boss bokoblin, a new layer of combat is added. He can change the behaviour of the bokoblins, whether it's to raise their shields and defend him, or attack the player in unison. He's also just a cool new big enemy to fight, so a decent addition overall. We also get the return of Gibdos. This returning enemy has a strong defense against any non-elemental attacks, taking minimal damage. The only way to defeat them is to use elemental attacks to weaken them, which then allows the player to damage them any way that they wish.
You know, I don't find it very realistic that people would,
However, I
that
do wish
Miko
that their
Miko would
weakness
have
perhaps
fans.
should have been limited to just lightning attacks. This would fill the elemental weakness gap, as ice and fire types are weak to each other. We got so close with Gibdos to being perfect, but a weakness to all elements is slightly too much. It's unlikely that a player will not have some level of elemental monster parts of something to fuse to their arrow, even just fire fruit. When I initially believed that it was just lightning that removed their defense, I made more of an effort to keep up stock of items that did lightning damage. Once I realized any element can weaken them, this effort was no longer required, which was a little disappointing. Arakudas are new enemies, roaming the surface as well as the skies. They can often be found carrying enemies or bombs. Having only 2 HP, it's incredibly easy to take them down with a single arrow. While weak enemies aren't an inherent problem, this enemy is disappointing. It's the only enemy that can fly around in the sky, and is barely even a nuisance. Roaming around the skies isn't very dangerous, as these enemies will likely miss you as long as you're continuously moving. In fact, you can probably do nothing, and they might even accidentally kill themselves. Using an Arakuda eyeball to track them will take them down instantly, and will also provide you with another eyeball, so your resources are replenished. The intention of the Arakuda appears to be an enemy that requires you to use ranged attacks, as well as provide an enemy that can attack you while you roam the skies. But unfortunately, their lack of HP makes them too easy to deal with to really shake up the combat that much. Evermeans were an enemy that did take me by surprise. These evil trees will jump to life when you get near them. They require a blade to defeat them, but again, they do have a low HP pool. I wish these were more common on the surface. I would have loved to genuinely be on edge anytime I entered into a forest. But where this enemy does in fact shine is in the depths. They can appear in larger groups, and especially when getting attacked by these living trees in the darkness can cause a bit of panic. This is where I think the low HP enemy is done well, in comparison to the Arakudas especially. This enemy can genuinely take you by surprise, throw you off, and requires a specific weapon type to defeat them. When venturing through caves, you'll come across some new enemy types also, Horriblins and Like-Likes. Much like other common enemies, the Horriblins come in variations that scale in difficulty, and Like-Likes will also have elemental variations. The Horriblins are great additions to the roster of monsters, taking advantage of their habitat in the caves, crawling around on the ceilings and throwing rocks at you. They also appropriately give you heavier horns, allowing you to excavate the caves by making weapons out of them. Like-Likes can also often be found inside caves, and these are easily one of my favourite new additions. They come in different elemental forms, including some shielded by rock, and require a different strategy to defeat them compared to other enemies. What's great about this enemy is their use as a supplier of shields. This is a reliable way to get shields, but also a good reference to Like-Likes of the past, which would eat your shields and had to be defeated to get them back, which can still occur in this game. Sometimes Like-Likes won't drop shields and instead something almost completely random, but their shield drop rate is consistent enough that they are a reliable method of restocking. We also have the introduction of the Constructs, robots designed by the Zonai to protect the Sky Islands. You can often find them using various types of weapons, from flamethrowers to rocket arrows. As these enemies have separate allegiance to the typical minions, you may also find them near demon enemies on the surface. You can take advantage of this by taking down the barriers between the two enemy types, pitting them against each other, similar to what you can do with a Muddlebud. And much like the Like-Like, what's great about these constructs is that they're given an individual purpose in the overall gameplay. Defeating constructs rewards you with not only their horns, but also Zonai charges, which can either be consumed to give you temporary energy or traded at a Zonai dispenser. And this is a great design choice, as much like monster parts now being useful for making weapons, the player is more likely to actually drop down onto islands and engage in combat there to earn this reward, rather than just flying all over them. The most powerful enemy in the game is one that hides and can appear out of nowhere to drain you of your life, the Gloomspawn. You may try to run away, but these enemies can quickly catch up to you, and if you fight them, you begin a tough challenge. Patience is not an option. If you spend too long trying to damage them bit by bit at a time, they will respawn over and over and over, forcing you to run and climb and hope they despawn, or face them head on. They'll darken the area around you, making you unable to restore your hearts lost to gloom without having the correct meals or elixirs prepared. Being good at the game really isn't enough for these guys. You can't just stand in a certain spot and parry them to death. You need good equipment and damage. If you do not have enough items to fight them, you will struggle. But if you succeed, the fight may continue, and you may have to go face to face against a Phantom Ganon. Though the variety in enemy roles is certainly much stronger, with each giving you different items and resources for use in various different places, it certainly isn't a rare opinion that the enemy variety itself is a little below what we expected. While there are lots of new enemies, they simply don't show up as much as the standard Bokoblins, Moblins, and Zalfos across both the surface and the depths, which I have just had enough of. The main new common enemy type is Constructs, and they're fine. A good amount of them exist, especially across the sky, but the main issue is that when you get down to the details, they basically have the same gimmick as mini Guardians. Yes, they can wield much more interesting weapons as they can use Zonai devices and fuse, but their main moveset is simple in such a similar way to Guardians from before, where they'll hold a weapon in a direction before they swing. And instead of shooting little beams, they'll have lasers or bows with rockets on them. They're cool, but they're basically a slight tweak and reskin to what we had before that is now removed. Mini Guardians also only existed in shrines, and even then it felt a little repetitive. Now, this replacement also extends to all over the sky and some parts of the surface. There are also new enemies with the tiny health pool, and while Evermean still manage to have a presence, Airacudas are just so pathetic. The sky does feel like it's missing a real airborne threat, but it's not only the sky that's missing out. It would have been nice if there was a new, hard enemy type in each location, like there was with the Gibdos. Development for this game was longer than Breath of the Wild, so I think it's fair to point out the lack of new enemies was a little disappointing. Gibdos in the desert is a great start, but I think we expected a little more, maybe Skulltulas in Farron, Dodongos in Death Mountain, Wolfos in Hebra, Darknuts in Hyrule Castle. There are just too many places in the map that don't have anything new to fight. The caves are given the best treatment by far, with a new common enemy in the Horriblins as well as Like-Likes. Like-Likes are perfect, requiring a different strategy as well as a variety in their attacks and defense among them with the different elemental types, giving you shields. They actually set a standard that feels unmatched across the rest of the map. Guardians were the most important enemy in Breath of the Wild. Not only were they one of the game's mascots, but they were a great progress marker.
What the hell were there
Taking
two
down the
remaining
Guardian
things?
is a huge moment, making the player feel like they might be strong enough to take down the game's final challenge.
Not
Gloom
defensive things, I
spawns are
suppose.
this game's replacement of the Guardian Stalkers, and there are parts that they do a lot better in,
Or maybe
but
just
other
not
parts
good
that
enough
they are much
defense.
weaker in. So let's discuss where they fall behind Guardians.